have carried this story the way some women carry a stone in the pocket of their apron, small enough to forget most days, heavy enough to remind you who you are when you reach for bread. Now my hands are old, veined like dry riverbeds, and the stone has worn smooth. Still, it presses against me when the nights are quiet, especially then. People warned me before I ever became his wife. They did not use loud voices or dramatic words. No one ever said danger plainly. They only paused when his name was spoken. They lowered their eyes. They leaned closer and whispered as if fear itself might hear them. They told me not to look him in the eyes. They said fear would keep me alive. They said obedience would keep me fed. They said silence would keep me married. At 17, I did not know the difference between those kinds of survival. I believed fear was a tool, something handed down like a family recipe. My mother wore it carefully. My father treated it with respect. Our neighbors passed it between them like a bowl at supper, each taking only what they needed. Fear, they taught me, was not shameful. It was practical. It kept poor people breathing. And we were poor in a way that does not photograph well. Not the romantic poverty of torn hems and brave smiles, but the kind that smells of damp walls and thin soup. The kind that makes choices for you before you know you have a voice. Hunger has a way of speaking first in a household like that. It speaks louder than dreams, louder than love. When his name came to our door, it came dressed as opportunity. I remember the day my mother first said it out loud. We were alone in the kitchen. The light came in weakly through a window clouded with years of cooking smoke. She was shelling beans into a chipped bowl, her fingers moving fast, as if speed might produce more food. She did not look at me when she spoke. "There is a man," she said. "He has land. He has a house that does not leak. He is looking for a wife." I waited for her to say more, but she did not. The silence stretched. Outside, a cart rolled by, its wheels complaining against the road. Somewhere, a child laughed, sharp and sudden. I remember thinking how strange it was that joy could sound so careless. "What kind of man?" I asked. My mother's hands slowed. One bean slipped and rolled across the table. She reached for it, missed, and finally let it fall to the floor. "A difficult one," she said. That was the first warning. Others followed in their own careful ways. An aunt who pressed her lips together and said only, "God will be with you." A neighbor who touched my arm too tightly and told me to be respectful always. A girl I had grown up with who asked, her voice shaking, if I was afraid. I was not afraid yet. Fear needs shape before it can settle in the body. At that point, he was only a name and shadows can be gentle when you have not learned their weight. The town, though, knew the weight, or thought it did. They said he was a man who kept to himself. They said his house sat too far from the others, as if he preferred the company of fields to people. They said he had lived through something that bent him inward. A tragedy, perhaps. A loss. No one ever agreed on which. Silence is a generous place for rumors to grow. Some said his first wife had died young. Some said she had simply vanished. Others said there had never been a first wife at all, that he was born already old and alone. The stories changed depending on who was telling them, but they all ended the same way, with a look that suggested I should not ask more. I did not ask. I had been taught that questions were a luxury. We were choosing between a future and a continued struggle that would grind my parents down to bone. I was the oldest daughter. My leaving would mean less food needed, one less mouth to worry over. It would mean a small bride price, enough to buy seed, enough to fix the roof before the rains. Sacrifice is an easy word when it belongs to someone else. When it becomes your own, it feels different. It feels like standing still while the ground moves away from you. I agreed because agreement was expected. I agreed because my mother's shoulders had begun to curve under the weight of years, and my father's cough had deepened. I agreed because love, at that point, was something I thought happened to other people. The first time I saw him, he did not look like a man to be feared. That, perhaps, was the most unsettling thing of all. He stood in our doorway, hat in hand, his hair already threaded with gray, though he could not have been much older than 30. His face was plain, almost forgettable, the kind you might pass on the road and never think of again. His eyes were downcast, his posture careful, as if he were afraid of taking up too much space. He spoke softly. He thanked my parents. He nodded when spoken to. When he looked at me, it was brief, respectful, as though he were already practicing the distance everyone else insisted upon. "This is him," my mother said unnecessarily. He inclined his head. If he noticed the way my hands trembled, he did not show it. I searched for signs of what the town had promised me. I looked for hardness, for cruelty written into the lines of his face. I found none. Instead, I found a tiredness that felt familiar. The kind of tiredness that settles into people who have carried something heavy for too long without setting it down. Still, fear does not disappear just because it has no evidence. It lingers out of habit. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and quiet instruction. Be obedient. Be patient. Do not provoke him. Do not argue. Do not ask questions that do not concern you. I learned how to fold my life smaller, how to imagine myself fitting into a space I had not yet seen. On the morning I left my parents' house, my mother braided my hair slowly, her fingers gentle for once. She tied the ribbon at the end and rested her hands on my shoulders. "You will be safe if you are careful," she said. I nodded, because that was what daughters did. I did not tell her that safety, to me, had already begun to feel like another word for loneliness. His house was farther from town than I had expected. The road narrowed as we walked, the houses thinning until there were only fields and the sound of insects rising and falling like breath. The house itself was sturdy, built of dark wood, its windows clean. It did not look like a place of secrets. It looked like a place that had learned to endure. Inside, everything was neat. Not lovingly arranged, but orderly, as if chaos had once lived there and been carefully chased away. He showed me where things were with simple gestures. The kitchen, the bedroom, the place where water was drawn. He spoke little, and when he did, his words were practical. "You will sleep here," he said, indicating the bed. "I will sleep on the bench until you are settled." That night, alone in the unfamiliar quiet, I listened to the sounds of the house. The wind through the eaves, the distant call of an animal. Somewhere, the soft creak of wood as he shifted in his sleep. Fear came to sit beside me then, tentative, uncertain. It did not yet know where to place its hands. Days passed, then weeks. Marriage, I learned, was not what the stories promised. There was no sudden transformation, no moment where I woke and understood my place. Instead, there were small moments strung together like beads. Cooking, cleaning, working alongside him in the fields, our movements careful not to collide. Silence, long and unbroken, punctuated by brief exchanges about weather or work. He never raised his voice. He never struck me. He never demanded more than what was necessary. And yet, the fear remained, fed by the constant reminder of what everyone expected him to be. Sometimes I would catch him watching me with an expression I could not name. Not hunger, not anger, something closer to concern, perhaps, or regret. When our eyes met, he would look away as if ashamed of being seen. There were moments of kindness that confused me. He left food for me before going to work. He repaired a tear in my dress without comment. Once, when I burned my hand on a pot, he brought me water and cloth, his touch light, almost reverent. Each kindness unsettled me more than cruelty might have. It forced me to question the shape of my fear. It forced me to ask, quietly, whether I had inherited something that did not belong to me. At night, lying awake, I wondered what it was that everyone was so afraid of. I wondered what secret could live inside a man who moved through the world as if apologizing for his existence. I did not know then that answers, when they come, do not always arrive with noise. Sometimes, they come on a night like any other, wrapped in darkness and sound, and they change the way you understand everything that came before. I did not know that one night would open a door I had not realized was there, and behind it, a truth no one had expected, least of all me. That night was still waiting for me. And so was the secret. Poverty is not just the absence of money. It is a language you learn before you know how to read. It teaches you how to listen for footsteps, how to stretch a meal until it becomes more memory than food, how to recognize the sound of worry in a parent's breath. By the time the decision was made to marry me off, Poverty had already shaped my bones. It had decided what kind of woman I would become long before I ever stood beside a man whose name made others uneasy. Our house, the one I grew up in, leaned slightly to the left, as if tired of standing straight. When it rained, water crept in through the roof and ran down the walls in thin, shining lines. We placed bowls beneath the leaks and pretended it was enough. At night, the damp settled into the floorboards, and the smell of wet wood mixed with whatever we had cooked that day. There was always a smell. Smoke, boiled grains, sometimes nothing at all. My father worked when there was work. Fields, repairs, carrying loads for men who could afford to hire someone else. His hands were always rough, cracked open in places that never quite healed. My mother learned how to make do with what remained. She measured everything carefully, not just food, but hope. Too much hope could be dangerous. It made disappointment sharper. I had younger siblings who watched me the way children watch someone older, with trust and quiet expectation. I helped raise them in the small ways girls do when life demands it. I learned to cook before I learned to dream. I learned to clean before I learned to ask why. When people spoke of marriage, they did not speak of love. They spoke of mouths fed, debts eased, futures secured. So when the man came, when his name was finally spoken plainly, it did not arrive as a shock. It arrived as an answer to a question we had been asking without words. Still, the way the town reacted told me this was no ordinary arrangement. People have a way of sharing fear without ever admitting it is fear. They disguise it as concern, as wisdom earned through years of watching others suffer. In the weeks after the decision was made, women came to our house under the pretense of helping my mother prepare. They kneaded dough, folded cloth, and offered advice that felt heavier than the work itself. Be patient, one said, pressing the dough too hard. Men like him require patience. Keep your voice low, another murmured, as if he might hear her through walls and distance. Quiet women live longer. An older woman, one I barely knew, took my hands and held them for a long moment. Her palms were dry and warm. Fear is not always loud, she said. Sometimes it lives in what is not said. No one explained what that meant. The men were no different. They avoided my eyes, spoke to my father instead, and nodded solemnly as if acknowledging a burden I would soon carry. I wanted to ask what they knew, what they had seen. But I had already learned that questions once asked could not be taken back, and sometimes not knowing was safer. The story of his fearfulness was told in fragments, never complete enough to satisfy, never clear enough to argue with. Someone said he had lost his parents young. Someone else said a fire had taken something from him that could not be replaced. A few claimed he was cursed, though they could not say by whom or why. The details shifted, but the conclusion remained steady. He was not like other men. He was to be approached carefully, respected from a distance. And yet no one could point to a single act of cruelty. No bruised wives, no raised voices overheard, no broken things thrown in anger. It was as if the town feared not what he did, but what he carried. I did not know, then, how often fear attaches itself to grief. The arrangement itself was discussed in low voices at night, when my siblings slept and the house felt smaller. I lay awake on my mat, listening as my parents spoke in murmurs they believed I could not hear. He is stable, my father said. He has land, he will not starve her. But he is strange, my mother replied. People talk. People always talk, my father said, with a tired sigh. Talking does not fill a stomach. There was a pause then, the kind that speaks louder than words. She will be safe, my mother said finally, though it sounded more like a question than a statement. Safety, I would learn, is a word people use when they mean survival. When the day came to meet him properly, not just as a name but as a presence, I felt oddly calm. My fear had not yet found its footing. It hovered at the edges, uncertain, waiting for instruction. He arrived on foot, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He greeted my parents respectfully, his voice steady but subdued. When he turned to me, he hesitated, as if unsure of the proper distance. "It is good to meet you," he said. That was all. No attempt at charm, no authority in his tone, just a simple acknowledgement offered and then withdrawn. We sat across from each other while my parents spoke with him. I studied his hands, noticing how carefully he held them together, fingers interlaced as if to keep them from wandering. There were scars there, thin white lines that told of old injuries. Work injuries, I assumed. Nothing violent in their shape. When he spoke of his home, he described it plainly. A house, fields, work that needed doing. His life sounded spare, stripped of excess. It mirrored my own more than I expected. "Do you have any questions?" he asked me at one point, turning his attention fully toward me. The room felt suddenly smaller. My parents went quiet. The women who had gathered nearby paused in their movements. Questions crowded my throat, pressing against one another. Who are you? Why are people afraid? What happened to you? What will you expect of me? I swallowed them all. No, I said. He nodded, accepting my answer without disappointment or relief. That, too, confused me. The days before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and instruction. I was taught what was expected of a wife, though most of it I already knew. Obedience, endurance, modesty. I was told to keep the peace, to avoid provoking anger, to remember my place. No one told me what to do if fear did not match reality. On the morning I left my childhood home, the air was cool and still. My siblings clung to me, their arms tight around my waist. I kissed their hair, breathing in the familiar scent of smoke and earth. My mother adjusted my shawl, her hands lingering longer than necessary. "Be careful," she said again, as if repetition might grant protection. I wanted to tell her that I was not afraid, that something about this felt inevitable rather than dangerous. But I knew better than to challenge her understanding of the world. Fear had kept her alive. Who was I to argue with that? The walk to his house felt longer than it was. Each step carried me further from what I knew and closer to something undefined. The town thinned behind us. The road narrowed. The noise faded until there was only the sound of our footsteps and the soft rustle of the fields. He walked slightly ahead of me, never once looking back to hurry me along. When I slowed, he slowed. When I stopped to adjust my bundle, he waited. It was a small courtesy, easily overlooked, but it stayed with me. His house stood alone, solid and quiet. There was no sense of abandonment, no decay. It felt lived in, cared for, though without warmth, as if someone had done what needed to be done and nothing more. Inside, everything had a place. The table was scrubbed clean. The floor swept. There were no unnecessary decorations, no personal touches that revealed much about the man who lived there. It was a space designed for function, not comfort. "You can put your things here," he said, gesturing toward the corner that would be mine. That first day passed without incident. We ate in silence, not an uncomfortable silence, but one heavy with adjustment. Two strangers learning how to share space without colliding. He asked if the food was acceptable. I said yes. He nodded and ate slowly, methodically. When night came, he did something unexpected. He told me he would sleep elsewhere until I felt settled. He said it without embarrassment or insistence, as if it were the most natural arrangement in the world. "You should rest," he said. "You have had a long day." Alone in the bed that night, I listened to the house breathe. The walls creaked softly as they cooled. Somewhere, he shifted his weight on the bench. I waited for fear to rise up and claim me. It did not come as I expected. Instead, curiosity settled in. Quiet, persistent. I wondered what kind of man gives a wife space when the world insists he is something to be feared. I wondered what story lived behind his careful movements and measured words. In the days that followed, routine took hold. I learned the rhythms of the house, when he rose, when he left for the fields, when he returned. Our interactions were brief but respectful. He never hovered, never questioned my movements, never inspected my work. Sometimes I would catch him watching me from the corner of my eye, not with suspicion, but with something closer to concern, as if he were afraid of doing something wrong. Acts of kindness appeared quietly, without announcement. A repaired stool, extra food left on the table. Once, a small bundle of cloth placed beside my things, sturdy and new, without explanation. I did not know how to respond to these gestures. Gratitude felt dangerous, like an invitation. Suspicion felt unfair. So I held both, uncertain, waiting for clarity. The town did not visit often. When they did, they kept their distance. Conversations remained shallow. Eyes flicked toward him and away again. I began to notice how he shrank in their presence, how his shoulders curved inward, how his voice lowered further. It was then I began to understand that the fear surrounding him did not empower him. It diminished him. At night, lying awake, I thought of all the warnings I had been given. I turned them over in my mind, examining them for truth. They felt inherited, passed down without proof, like an old story told too many times to be questioned. Still, fear does not vanish simply because kindness appears. It waits. It watches. It tells you not to trust what seems gentle, because gentleness, too, can be a disguise. I lived in that space for a long time, between what I had been told and what I was beginning to see, between expectation and experience, between fear and something dangerously close to understanding. I did not yet know that understanding would demand something from me, that it would ask me to face not just his truth, but my own. For now, life moved forward in careful steps. Days passed, seasons shifted slightly, and somewhere beneath the quiet routine, something waited. A truth pressed deep into the walls of that house, patient as time itself. I felt it sometimes, like a held breath. I did not yet know when it would be released. Fear, when it does not erupt, learns how to settle. It becomes part of the furniture of your mind, something you navigate around without thinking. That was how it lived with me in those early months of marriage. It did not shout. It did not warn. It simply existed, quiet and watchful, reminding me to choose my words carefully, to measure my steps, to sleep lightly. Daily life took on a rhythm that felt almost peaceful, if peace can exist alongside vigilance. I rose before the sun, as I always had, and set about the work of the house. The mornings were my favorite. There is something honest about the early hours before the world has decided who it will be that day. I would light the fire, prepare what little breakfast we had, and listen as the fields slowly came alive. Birds calling to one another, insects stirring, the soft sound of wind brushing against crops. He would emerge quietly, already dressed, his movements deliberate. We shared meals in silence most mornings, not out of hostility but out of habit. Words felt unnecessary. When he finished, he would nod once, thank me, and head out to work. Thank you. Such a simple phrase, but it unsettled me every time. Gratitude was not something I had been taught to expect from a husband. It lingered in the air after he left, making me question what I thought I understood. During the day, I worked alongside him when needed, though he never demanded it. In the fields, we kept a respectful distance, our tools moving in quiet coordination. Sometimes our hands brushed by accident, and each time he pulled back immediately, as if burned. I began to notice the way he listened, not just to me but to everything, the weather, the ground beneath his feet, the sounds of the land. He carried himself like someone always braced for something unseen. It was not the posture of a man preparing to strike, but of one expecting to be struck. That realization troubled me. Fear, I had been taught, belongs to the weak or the guilty. Yet here was a man feared by many, living as if he himself were afraid. Small moments accumulated, each one eroding the shape of the monster the town had built for him. Once, a stray dog wandered near the house, ribs sharp beneath its fur, eyes wary. I expected him to chase it away. Instead, he left scraps by the door and retreated inside, watching from a distance until the animal ate. Another time, I dropped a bowl and it shattered on the floor. The sound was loud in the quiet house. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I flinched, my breath catching, bracing for anger. He froze. I am sorry, I said quickly, already kneeling to clean up the mess. He moved then, but not toward me. Away. He stepped back as if afraid of frightening me further. It is only a bowl, he said. His voice was steady, but there was something strained beneath it. You did nothing wrong. I nodded, though my hands shook as I gathered the pieces. He did not raise his voice. He did not scold me. He did not even sigh. And yet, my heart raced as if I had narrowly escaped something. That night, lying awake, I realized that my fear was no longer tied to his actions. It was tied to the stories I carried. Fear, it seemed, did not need proof to survive. It fed on memory and expectation, not reality. Still, curiosity is a dangerous thing when paired with silence. I wanted to ask him about the rumors, about the way people avoided him, about the weight that seemed to press his shoulders inward. But I did not know how to begin without accusing him of something unnamed. So I watched instead. I watched how he treated the land, how carefully he worked, as if afraid of causing harm. I watched how he spoke to animals, softly, with respect. I watched how he avoided conflict whenever possible, how he yielded space rather than claim it. At times, it felt as though he was living under an invisible sentence, serving time for a crime no one would name. The town remained distant. When we went there together, conversations stopped when he approached. People greeted me politely, some with pity, some with curiosity. They spoke to him briefly, if at all. I noticed how children were pulled closer, how women lowered their voices. Once, as we passed a group of men, one of them muttered something under his breath. I did not catch the words, but I saw the way my husband stiffened, his jaw tightening for just a moment before relaxing again. He said nothing. He never said anything. That silence began to feel deliberate, not empty, but guarded. There were nights when I heard him wake suddenly, his breath sharp, as if pulled from a bad dream. He would sit there in the dark, unmoving, until his breathing slowed. I never asked what he dreamed of. I sensed that whatever haunted him was not something words could easily reach. Fear and curiosity lived together in me then, uneasy companions. Each small kindness made the fear feel misplaced. Each unanswered question made the curiosity ache. And yet, despite everything, there was no intimacy between us beyond shared space. He kept his distance, physically and emotionally. Our marriage existed in function, not closeness. I did not know whether to feel relieved or rejected. Sometimes, I wondered if the town's warnings had reached him, too. If he believed himself dangerous because others did. There is a way shame can shape a person until they fit the shape they have been given. As weeks turned into months, my fear changed texture. It became less sharp, more diffuse. Less about what he might do, more about what I might discover. I sensed there was something beneath his quiet, something he carried carefully, as one carries a wound that has never healed properly. I felt it in the way he avoided mirrors, in the way he flinched at sudden sounds, in the way he treated me not as property or burden, but as something fragile he was afraid to break. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the fields in soft gold, he surprised me by speaking more than usual. "The crops are growing well," he said. "This year may be kinder than the last." I looked at him, startled by the offering of conversation. "Yes," I replied, "it seems so." He hesitated, as if weighing whether to continue. "If you ever need anything," he said slowly, "you should tell me." The words hung between us, simple but heavy. I wanted to ask him then, about his past, about the town, about the fear that surrounded him like a second skin. Instead, I said, "Thank you." He nodded, satisfied or resigned, I could not tell. That night, the air felt different. Thicker, charged. A storm was brewing somewhere beyond the horizon. The wind shifted, rattling the shutters. I lay awake, listening, my thoughts restless. There are moments in life when everything feels poised, as if waiting for permission to change. That night was one of them. I did not know it then, but something was already in motion. The house creaked softly around us. The darkness pressed close. Somewhere outside, thunder murmured, distant but persistent. I felt fear stir again, not the inherited kind, but something deeper. A sense that whatever truth lived in that house was nearing the surface. That silence, stretched too long, was beginning to strain. I turned on my side and stared into the dark, my heart beating a little faster than necessary. I did not know that soon, very soon, the night would demand that fear and curiosity finally meet. And I did not yet understand what it would cost me to see him clearly. The night it happened did not announce itself as important. There was no omen written in the sky, No sudden silence to warn me that something long buried was about to surface. It began like any other night, with the slow closing of daylight and the familiar routines that marked the end of a working day. I had finished clearing the table when the wind rose suddenly, rattling the shutters with more force than usual. The air felt heavy, thick with the promise of rain. He stood near the doorway, listening, his head tilted slightly, as if reading a language written in sound. "There will be a storm," he said. I nodded. Storms were not uncommon, but something in his voice made me pause. Not fear exactly. Readiness. We secured what needed securing. He checked the roof, the door, the shutters. I watched him move with practiced efficiency, each action calm, deliberate. When everything was done, we retreated inside, the house settling around us like an animal preparing to sleep. Night fell fully then, swift and dark. The first rain came hard, striking the roof with sharp insistence. Thunder rolled closer, no longer distant but immediate, filling the space between breaths. I lay down, pulling the blanket around me, listening to the storm assert itself. Wind howled through the gaps in the eaves. Rain hammered the walls. The world beyond the house dissolved into sound and shadow. At first I slept. It was the noise that woke me, not thunder but something else. A sharp, sudden sound like wood striking wood. My heart leapt, fear surging before reason could intervene. I lay still, straining to listen. Another sound followed, softer this time, a muffled thud. I sat up, my breath shallow. The house felt different in the dark, its familiar shapes distorted by flickering lamplight and restless shadows. I listened again, my pulse loud in my ears. From somewhere deeper in the house came a low sound. Not a word, not quite a cry, something restrained, pulled inward. I slipped out of bed, my feet cold against the floor. The storm outside raged on, thunder crashing so close it made the walls tremble. I wrapped my shawl tightly around myself and stepped into the narrow passage that led toward the storage room and the small space he used when he did not sleep beside me. The sound came again. My fear surged, sharp and immediate. Every warning I had ever received rose up at once, crowding my mind. Do not go looking. Do not ask. Do not provoke what sleeps best undisturbed. But curiosity, once awakened, does not listen easily to reason. I took another step, then another. The door to the small room was ajar. A thin line of lamplight spilled into the passage, trembling with each gust of wind. I hesitated there, my hand hovering just above the doorframe. Inside, he sat on the floor. Not on the bench where he usually slept, but on the ground, his back against the wall. The lamp beside him cast uneven light across the room, throwing long shadows that moved with the storm. His shoulders were hunched forward, his hands gripping something in his lap. For a moment, he did not notice me. Then the thunder struck again, impossibly loud, and he flinched hard, his breath hitching sharply. The sound he made then was unmistakable. Pain, not physical, but something older, deeper. I stepped forward without thinking. He looked up. The expression on his face stopped me where I stood. I had expected anger or shame or the hard mask of a man caught in something he wished to hide. Instead, I saw fear, raw and unguarded. The kind of fear that strips a person down to whatever they were before the world taught them how to pretend. "I am sorry," he said quickly, his voice unsteady. "I did not mean to wake you." "What is wrong?" I asked, though my voice trembled. He looked away, jaw tightening, as if bracing himself for something worse than the storm. "Nothing," he said. "Go back to bed." But I did not move. Another crash of thunder shook the house. He pressed his hand harder against whatever he held, his knuckles whitening. The lamp flickered, and in that brief shift of light, I saw it clearly. In his hands was a small wooden box. It was old, its edges worn smooth by touch. He held it as one might hold something fragile, something precious. His grip was desperate, protective. I had seen that box before, tucked away on a high shelf in the storage room. He had never mentioned it. I had never asked. "What is that?" I asked softly. The question hung in the air, heavier than the thunder. For a long moment, He did not answer. His breathing was uneven, his gaze fixed somewhere past me. The storm seemed to close in, rain and wind pressing against the house as if trying to force their way inside. I should have left then. I know that now. There are doors in life that do not open without consequence. But I was already standing on the threshold, and something inside me knew that turning away would mean living forever with the shape of this moment carved into my mind. "Please," I said, "you're afraid." That was the first time I had ever named it aloud. His shoulders sagged slightly, as if the effort of holding himself together had become too much. "I am not afraid of you," I added, though I was not entirely sure it was true. He let out a sound that was almost a laugh, but broken, unfinished. "Everyone says that at first," he said quietly. The words stung, though they were not meant to wound. Another crash of thunder tore through the sky, and this time he did not flinch. Instead, he bowed his head, his forehead nearly touching the box. "I did not want you to see this," he said. "No one ever does." "What is it?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. For a long time, the only sound was the storm. Rain poured down in sheets. Wind screamed through the fields. The world beyond the walls felt wild and unforgiving. Then, slowly, he opened the box. Inside were not weapons, not tools, not anything that matched the fears that had been planted in me since girlhood. Inside were letters. Carefully folded, worn thin with age. Some were stained, the ink blurred as if touched by water long ago. Others were brittle at the edges, handled too many times. He lifted one with trembling fingers. "My sister wrote these," he said. The words settled into the room like dust. Sister. The town had never mentioned a sister. "She was younger than me," he continued, his voice steadying as he spoke, as if words themselves were anchoring him. "She was fragile, not weak, just sensitive to the world. Loud sounds frightened her. Sudden changes unsettled her." Another thunderclap echoed, and I understood, suddenly, the way he had listened to the storm earlier. The readiness, the tension. "When our parents died," he said, "she came to live with me. I promised I would keep her safe." He swallowed hard, his hand tightening around the letter. "The night of the fire," he went on, "they said I was the only one who came out." The room felt very still despite the storm. "But I was not alone," he said. The words did not land with shock. They landed with sorrow. "She could not run," he said simply. "The smoke confused her. She panicked." His breath hitched, but he did not stop. "I went back for her." My heart pounded. I remembered the rumors, the fire, the tragedy no one would explain. "They said I should have let her go," he said. "They said one life was better than none, but I could not leave her there." His voice cracked then, just slightly. "I got her out," he said, "but the damage was already done." I stared at him, my fear unraveling thread by thread. "She lived," he said, "but she was never the same. The smoke hurt her lungs, the fear, it stayed with her." He closed the box gently, as if finishing the story exhausted him. "I stayed awake every night after that," he continued, "listening for her breathing, listening for fire, listening for storms. The town saw what they wanted to see," he said. "A man who survived, a man who was different afterward. They did not see the nights I sat awake holding her hand while she shook. They did not see the way I learned to fear sound because it terrified her." He looked at me then, really looked at me, his eyes dark and honest. "When she died, years later, they said it was fate. They said I had been cursed from the beginning." He gestured weakly at the box. "These are all I have left." The storm raged on, but inside the house, something profound had shifted. All at once, the warnings, the silence, the fear made sense, not as truth, but as misunderstanding, as a town choosing an easy story over a complicated one. "You are not feared because you are cruel," I said slowly. He gave a small, bitter smile. "Fear does not require cruelty," he said, "only difference." I knelt then, without thinking, the cold floor seeping into my knees. I reached out, hesitated, and then placed my hand over his where it rested on the box. He did not pull away. For the first time since I had known him, He did not seem to be guarding himself against me. "I am sorry," I said, and I did not know who the words were for. His sister. The man he had been. The man he had become. "So am I," he replied. The storm began to ease then, as storms do, slowly, reluctantly. Thunder moved farther away. Rain softened. In the quiet that followed, I understood something that would change me forever. The man I had been warned to fear was not dangerous. He was wounded. And the town, in its fear, had never bothered to learn the difference. After the storm passed, the house did not immediately return to silence. Water still dripped from the eaves. The wind sighed through the fields, tired now, as if it had spent all its anger on the night. Inside, the lamp burned low, its flame steady at last. We remained where we were, the space between us altered in a way I could feel but not yet name. He closed the wooden box and set it carefully beside him, his hand lingering on the lid. The letters inside had returned to darkness, but their presence filled the room. I realized then that he had not hidden them out of secrecy alone. He had hidden them because memory, when exposed, can wound again. I should have gone back to bed. That would have been the sensible thing, the safe thing. But safety, I was beginning to understand, is not always the same as truth. "You do not have to sit on the floor," I said quietly. He looked at me as if the idea had not occurred to him. Slowly, he stood, stiff from the position, and moved to the bench. I followed, sitting at a careful distance, unsure of what was now permitted between us. For a long while, neither of us spoke. I listened to his breathing, still uneven but calmer than before. I thought of his sister, her fear of sound, the way the storm must have torn through her like a living thing. I imagined him holding her hand in the dark, listening for signs of danger, teaching himself to fear the world because the world frightened her. "It changes you," I said finally, speaking more to the air than to him. "Being responsible for someone who cannot protect themselves." He nodded. "Yes, it does." I waited, unsure whether to ask more. He surprised me by continuing on his own. "When she was alive," he said, "I did not sleep much. Every noise felt like a warning. I learned to listen for trouble before it arrived." He gave a small, tired smile. "It seems I never unlearned it." The thought settled heavily in me. All those years, the town had seen a man who startled easily, who avoided noise, who kept his distance. They had called it something dark, something dangerous. They had never considered that it might be devotion that shaped him that way. I remembered the way he flinched at sudden sounds, the way he listened to the wind, the way he treated me like something that might break if handled too roughly. Fear, I realized, had taught him gentleness. The night stretched on, no longer heavy with storm but thick with something else. Understanding, perhaps, or the fragile beginnings of it. Eventually, he stood and said he would return to his bench. The words felt unnecessary now, but habit is a hard thing to loosen. "You may stay here," I said before I could stop myself. He hesitated, uncertainty written plainly on his face. "If you wish," I added, "I'm not afraid." Saying it out loud felt like a small rebellion, not against him, but against all the voices that had shaped my expectations. He nodded once, "Thank you." That night, we slept under the same roof in a new way. Not as strangers bound by necessity, but as two people sharing a truth that had waited too long to be spoken. In the days that followed, something subtle but profound shifted between us. He did not change suddenly. There was no dramatic softening, no sudden warmth that erased years of caution. Instead, the space between us began to feel less like distance and more like respect. Conversations grew slightly longer, silences less strained. One morning, as we worked side by side in the field, he spoke of his sister again. Small things, the way she used to hum when she was nervous, the way she loved the smell of bread baking. He spoke without looking at me, as if afraid the words might disappear if observed too closely. I listened, my hands busy, my heart attentive. The town, however, did not change. If anything, their distance sharpened as time went on. People noticed that I did not flinch around him, that I spoke to him easily, that I walked beside him without hesitation. Whispers followed us. I caught fragments of them when they thought I could not hear. She does not know what he is. Poor girl, she will learn. Love, in their minds, was never an option, only ignorance or denial. Once an older woman pulled me aside in the market. Her grip was firm, her eyes searching my face. "You must be careful," she said. "Men like him do not stay quiet forever." I thought of the letters, the storm, the way his hands trembled when he spoke of his sister. Men like him, I said carefully, are often quiet because they have already lost too much. She frowned, as if I had spoken nonsense. "Be warned," she said and turned away. I carried that conversation home with me, feeling its weight settle into my chest. That night, I told him what she had said. He did not react with anger. He never did. Instead, he looked tired. "They will always believe what is easiest," he said. "Fear is simpler than understanding." "Do you believe them?" I asked. He looked at me then, his gaze steady. "No," he said, "not anymore." That answer warmed something in me I had not realized was still cold. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, our marriage became something else. Not a grand love story, not the kind sung about or written down, but a partnership built on shared truth. We learned each other's rhythms. His silences no longer frightened me. My questions no longer startled him. There were still nights when he woke suddenly, breath sharp, body tense. When that happened, I would sit beside him until the moment passed. I did not speak unless he did. Sometimes all that was needed was presence. Once, after such a night, he said, "I do not deserve your patience." I considered that carefully. "Patience is not something you deserve," I replied. "It is something you earn by how you treat it." He smiled then, small and genuine. The town continued to watch us from a distance. They waited for something to confirm their fears. A raised voice, a bruise, a sign that they had been right all along. It never came. Instead, what they saw, slowly against their will, was constancy. A man who worked his land, a woman who did not shrink, a household that endured. Still, understanding did not spread easily. Fear, once planted, grows deep roots. I learned then that love does not always change the world around you. Sometimes, it only changes the world within you, and that must be enough. Looking back now, I know that night did not just reveal his secret. It revealed mine as well. I had believed fear was inherited, something passed down without question. That night taught me that fear can be unlearned, but only if you are willing to sit in the dark and listen. And I did listen. Because in his silence, I heard not danger but grief. And in choosing to stay, to understand rather than retreat, I began to become someone I had never been taught how to be. Someone unafraid of the truth. Understanding does not arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, in moments so small they almost escape notice. A shared look across a room, a sentence finished by the other, a silence that no longer feels like absence but like rest. That was how it unfolded between us after the storm, quietly, without ceremony. Yet understanding has a cost. The more I saw him clearly, the more I saw the world that had shaped us both. And the less I could pretend that love, even a quiet and honest one, would shield us from the weight of other people's fears. The town did not forgive easily. Fear had been too long their companion. They watched us the way people watch a crack in a wall, waiting for it to widen. Every kindness he showed was dismissed as an act. Every calm day was considered temporary. They spoke of patience the way one speaks of a fuse burning slowly toward its end. I felt it in the way shopkeepers lingered when he entered, eyes tracking his movements. In the way conversations paused, then resumed too quickly. In the way invitations never came, not for him, and by extension, not for me. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself that understanding one another was enough, that a marriage lived within its own walls, fed by its own truth. But isolation is a patient teacher. It shows you what you are missing even when you insist you do not need it. There were days when the loneliness pressed in harder than the fear ever had. One afternoon, as we returned from the fields, I found a mark carved into the post near our gate. a shallow symbol, hastily done. I did not know exactly what it meant, but I knew it was not meant kindly. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at it. He noticed, of course. He always noticed. "I will remove it," he said calmly. "You should not have to," I replied. He looked at me with something like apology in his eyes. "I have learned to," he said. That was when anger, long dormant in me, finally stirred. "You did nothing wrong," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Why must you always be the one to make things easier for others?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because if I do not," he said gently, "they will make it harder for you." The words struck deeper than any accusation. I understood then that his silence, his restraint, had never been about protecting himself. It had always been about protecting those he loved from the consequences of his difference. That night, I lay awake thinking of my mother, of the lessons she had taught me without realizing it. Survival before pride, silence before resistance. I wondered how many generations of women had learned the same thing, and how often it had been mistaken for wisdom. The next market day, I did something small, but for me, it felt enormous. When a woman I knew turned away as he approached, I did not lower my voice. I greeted her clearly, warmly, as I always had before marriage. When she looked startled, unsure how to respond, I did not fill the silence for her. I let it stand. It was not defiance, it was presence. The effect was subtle, but it rippled outward. A few people began to nod when we passed. A few began to speak to him directly, if briefly. Most still held back, but the certainty of their fear wavered. Fear, I learned, relies on unanimity. When even one person breaks rank, it begins to lose its authority. At home, life settled into a steady pattern. Work meals, evenings spent in quiet companionship. Sometimes we spoke of his sister. Sometimes we did not. He never forced the memories, never dramatized them. They existed as part of him, neither hidden nor displayed. One evening, as we sat together after supper, he said something that startled me. "I once thought it would be easier never to marry," he said. I looked at him. "Why?" "Because I did not want to burden anyone with what I carry," he replied. "You are not a burden," I said without hesitation. He smiled faintly. "You see me differently now," he said. Yes, I agreed. I do. And I realized then that this was the true risk of understanding. Once you see someone clearly, you cannot unsee them. You cannot return to the comfort of inherited judgments. You must live with the responsibility of your knowledge. There were moments when that responsibility felt heavy. When whispers reached my ears about how foolish I was. When distant relatives sent messages thick with concern and thinly veiled warnings. When I caught my reflection in a window and wondered who I would have been if I had listened to them. But there were other moments, too. Like the morning I fell ill and could not rise from bed, and he tended to the house without complaint, checking on me with quiet attentiveness. Or the evening he brought home a small carving he had made from spare wood, rough but thoughtful, saying only that it reminded him of something I had once mentioned liking. These moments did not erase the hardship, but they gave it meaning. Over time, I noticed that his fear lessened when he was with me. Not entirely. Scars do not vanish simply because they are understood, but the sharp edges softened. He slept more deeply. He startled less often. He laughed once, suddenly, at something absurd, and then looked surprised by the sound of his own voice. That laugh stayed with me. Still, there were nights when the past returned uninvited, when the wind howled just right, or the thunder rolled too close. On those nights, he withdrew into himself, eyes distant, breath shallow. I learned not to rush him back. One such night, long after the storm that had revealed everything, I sat beside him in silence. After a while, he spoke. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly, "marrying me?" The question was not heavy with self-pity. It was honest, vulnerable. I thought of my childhood home, the hunger, the expectations. I thought of the warnings, the fear that had once felt like a map for survival. "I regret many things," I said slowly, "but not this." He closed his eyes, as if absorbing the words. "Then you have given me more than you know," he said. I did not reply. Some truths do not require echo. The town never fully accepted him. That is also a truth. Some people are more comfortable with fear than with correction. But over the years, their certainty softened into something like unease. They no longer spoke of him as a threat. They spoke of him as strange, quiet, different. It was not justice, but it was progress. And for us, it was enough. Because what we had built inside our small, steady life did not depend on their approval. It depended on the courage to see one another clearly and the humility to admit when we had been wrong. As I look back now, I understand that the turning point of my life was not the storm, nor the revelation it brought. It was the choice I made afterward. To stay. To listen. To believe that fear, when inherited without question, can do more harm than any truth it tries to protect you from. And that choice, once made, shaped everything that followed. Time has a way of smoothing even the sharpest memories, not by erasing them, but by teaching you where to place them so they no longer cut every time you reach inward. Years passed after that turning, and with each one, our life took on a quiet weight, the kind that comes not from drama, but from endurance. We grew older together in small, almost unnoticeable ways. His hair lightened first at the temples, then across the crown. My hands stiffened in the mornings, joints complaining before they remembered their purpose. The seasons marked us more than birthdays ever did. We learned to read time in harvests, in rains, in the way our bodies answered the work demanded of them. The town changed too, though more slowly. Children grew up and left. New families arrived, unfamiliar with old stories. Some of the sharpest whispers faded simply because those who had carried them no longer had the breath to do so. Fear, when not constantly fed, begins to starve. Yet there were moments when the past reached out and reminded us it was still there. Once a fire broke out at the edge of town. It was small, quickly contained, but the smoke drifted far. I saw him freeze when he smelled it, his body reacting before his mind could intervene. His breath shortened, his eyes darkened with memory. Without thinking, I took his hand. He looked at me then, surprised, and in that instant I saw the distance he had traveled. Years earlier, he might have pulled away, ashamed of the fear that still lived in him. Now, he held on. "It passed," he said after a while. "Yes," I replied, "it did." That moment stayed with me, not because of the fear, but because of what followed it. Trust. The kind that does not need reassurance, only presence. We never spoke often of love. The word felt too grand, too polished for what we shared. What we had was quieter, built of consistency and care. We knew each other's habits, each other's limits. We learned when to speak and when silence was the kinder choice. There were no children of our own. That was another thing the town whispered about, another absence they found meaning in. But life had taught me that not every absence is a failure. Some are simply the shape of what is. He never blamed me. I never blamed him. We filled the space in other ways. The land, the work, the shared understanding that not all families look the same. As his body aged, the work grew harder. I took on more without complaint. He protested at first, then accepted it, learning slowly that reliance is not the same as weakness. One evening, as we sat together watching the sun sink into the fields, he said something that surprised me. "I used to think my life ended the night of the fire," he said. I turned to him, my heart tightening. Everything after felt like an extension, he continued. Something borrowed. I lived carefully because I did not think I was meant to be fully here. And now, I asked softly. Now, he said, I know I stayed because there was still something to do. I did not ask what that something was. I already knew. The town eventually stopped warning me. Not because they understood him fully, but because time had offered no evidence to support their fear. People are willing to let go of a story when it becomes inconvenient to maintain it, when it demands more explanation than they are willing to give. Some even began to speak of him with a kind of reluctant respect. He is quiet, they would say. He keeps to himself. He is a good worker. It was not an apology, but it was a correction. As for me, I had changed in ways I did not fully recognize until much later. The girl who had entered that marriage-believing fear was a form of wisdom, had grown into a woman who understood the cost of unquestioned judgment. I became more willing to stand where others hesitated, to speak when silence felt complicit, to listen beyond the surface of things. It did not make me popular, but it made me honest. There came a winter that was harder than the others. Cold settled into the land early and refused to leave. His health faltered then, quietly at first. A cough that lingered, fatigue that no amount of rest seemed to cure. I watched him the way he once watched his sister, listening for signs, bracing for trouble. The roles reversed so naturally it startled me. When he grew weaker, he apologized more than he should have. "I never wanted you to carry this," he said one night, his voice rough. I sat beside him, holding his hand, feeling the bones beneath the skin. "You carried enough alone," I replied. "Let me do this." He did not argue. In those days, I thought often about the nature of sacrifice, how it is praised when it is loud and visible, and ignored when it is quiet and enduring. How many lives are shaped by unseen acts of care that never earn recognition. He recovered slowly. Not fully, but enough. Enough to sit in the sun again. Enough to walk the fields at a measured pace. Enough to live, if not as before, then as he was now. One afternoon, long after the worst had passed, he brought out the wooden box. I had not seen it in years. He set it between us and opened it carefully. The letters were still there, fragile but intact. "I want you to have these," he said. I shook my head. "They are yours." He looked at me with that steady gaze that had become so familiar. "They are ours," he said. "You know them now, you carry them too." I accepted then, understanding what the gesture meant. Not a burden, but a trust. That night, I read the letters by lamplight, one by one. His sister's handwriting was uneven but earnest. She wrote of small joys, of fear and gratitude, of love that did not always have the right words but existed nonetheless. I wept quietly, not only for her, but for all the truths that are lost when people choose fear over curiosity. Years later, when he died, it was peacefully. There was no drama in it, no suddenness, just a gradual letting go, like the land resting after harvest. The town came then, as towns do. They brought food. They spoke kindly. Some even spoke of him with warmth. I accepted it all without bitterness. It was not their fault that they had learned too late. I buried him beneath a tree he had planted himself. Afterward, life narrowed again as it does after loss. But it did not collapse. It held. Now, as I sit with these memories, I understand why I waited so long to tell this story. Because it is not just his confession. It is mine. I was warned to fear the man I married, and I did at first. I carried that fear like an inheritance, never questioning who it truly belonged to. But one night revealed a secret no one expected. Not that he was dangerous, but that he was deeply, painfully human. And in learning that, I learned something else as well. Fear can be passed down through whispers, but so can understanding. If someone is brave enough to speak. I am an old woman now. The house is quieter than it ever was when I was young. Though not empty in the way people imagine emptiness. Silence, I have learned, can be full. It can carry voices, footsteps, laughter that no longer echoes but still lives somewhere just beneath the skin. I sit most evenings by the same window, watching the light fade from the fields. The tree under which he rests has grown tall and strong. In spring, its leaves return without fail, as if reminding me that endurance is its own kind of promise. People still come to visit me sometimes. Younger women, mostly. Some are curious, some are cautious. A few carry the same look I once did, the one that says they are standing at the edge of a life they did not choose freely, trying to decide what kind of courage it will require. They ask me questions in careful ways. Was it hard, they ask, being married to a man everyone feared? I tell them the truth, but not the simple kind. Yes, I say, but not for the reasons they think. Fear itself is hard to live with, not because it keeps you alert, but because it keeps you from seeing clearly. It teaches you to confuse quiet with danger, difference with threat, pain with cruelty. I tell them that I was warned many times, and that those warnings were given with love. People rarely mean harm when they pass down fear. They mean protection. They mean survival. They mean to spare you the suffering they believe is inevitable. But fear, when inherited without question, becomes a cage built by many hands. I tell them about the storm, though not always in detail. Some truths need the right ears. I tell them about the letters, about the sister whose fear shaped a man more deeply than any anger ever could. I tell them how grief can look like something else when viewed from a distance. And I tell them this, most of all. The most dangerous stories are the ones everyone agrees on without ever checking if they are true. Looking back, I see how close I came to living a smaller life. How easily I could have stayed guarded, distant, obedient to a fear that did not belong to me. I might have survived that way. Many do, but survival alone is a narrow achievement. What changed everything was not bravery in the way people like to celebrate it. It was something quieter. It was the decision to stay when leaving would have been easier. The decision to listen when silence felt safer. The decision to believe what I saw with my own eyes rather than what I had been told to see. Understanding did not erase pain. It did not rewrite the past. It did not make our life perfect or simple. But it made it honest. And honesty, I have learned, is what allows love to breathe. I still keep the wooden box. The letters are fragile now, their paper thin as dried leaves. I read them less often, not because they have lost meaning, but because they have become part of me. I no longer need to open the box to remember what they taught. They taught me that people are rarely what their reputations claim. They taught me that grief, when misunderstood, is often punished instead of healed. They taught me that silence can hide both monsters and miracles, and it is our responsibility to learn the difference. If there is wisdom in my age, this is what it has given me. Be careful what fears you accept as truth. Be careful what stories you repeat simply because they are familiar. And when you are told to fear someone, ask yourself quietly, who benefits from that fear remaining unchallenged? Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is look closer. Because truth does not always arrive loudly. Often it waits in the dark, patient and human. Hoping someone will finally sit beside it and listen. That is the secret no one expected. And it is the one I have carried all my life. Until now. Thank you for listening to my confession. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something you did not expect, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Stories like this live longer when they are heard.